shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey. And that's all it's about.
Who's ready to march? Let's set the drum. All day.
Bags like that guy has on his stick.
Woo! Yeah, that wind.
Hold that for a second. I gotta put my. Sun isn't,
I believe 2 years.
I actually don't use PowerPoint. For my own presentations, I usually...
So we're kind of like figuring out all the systems.
If you need a desk
Really, I know the media is really on this one.
Yeah, because that'll you just.
Our walkers are over by Harlow's, right around the corner, so they will be coming in momentarily. And again, we ask that you give them a big round of applause, hoot and holler, and make them feel welcome for really standing up for campaign finance reform and getting the big money out of politics. So they'll be here in just a minute. My name is Brian Beal. I'm Deputy Director of the Coalition for Open Democracy and for the New Hampshire Rebellion. If you have not signed in, let's join in.
But oh, when the saints go marching in, But oh, when the saints go marching in, yeah, well, I want to be in that number. Yes, when the saints go marching. Okay, we're going to do the song that we paraded with Granny D in 2004 when she ran for the Senate. And this is a song we walked around New Hampshire with her, singing and playing, and some of you know it. It's called Just a Walk with Granny D, sung to the tune of Just a Closer Walk with Thee. It goes Just a Walk with Granny D all the way to Washington, D.C. She's the one for you and me. Granny D, dear old Granny D. So in her memory, sing along if you can. Granny D. Everybody, join in. All the way to Washington, D.C. She's the one for you and me. Granny D, yeah, dear old Granny D. Just a walk with Granny D. All the way to Washington, D.C. And that's a long walk, folks. She's the one for you and me. Granny D, dear old Granny D.
Folks, one more time for Tattoo. Thank you for coming out. And not only did they come out today, but they've been with the cause since the beginning and marched with Granny D. That's amazing. So my name is Brian Beal. I am the Deputy Director, 2 weeks minted for Open Democracy and the New Hampshire Rebellion. And I am so pleased that you're here on this overcast day. But you know what? If you're walking, I'm a Boy Scout leader, and when you're walking and you're hiking a long way, this is a great weather to be in. You're not that hot, you got a nice breeze, and you don't get overheated. It's wonderful. So, if you haven't already gotten pizza, we invite you to do so. I think we still have a lot over there, and we have lots of Ben & Jerry's. My wife is very happy that the Ben & Jerry's is out of our freezer. And it's not coming back, okay? It's not very good for us to have Ben & Jerry's around the house. So we hope you'll eat that all up. So see the two young gentlemen and thank them for volunteering to help us out and scooping ice cream today. That's not an easy job. We have a variety of things that we're going to do for you today, and you've heard Tattoo. We are going to have a speech that Granny D delivered in 2003 to the Conval graduating class, and I'm told that it's one of Granny D's best speeches. And we're going to follow that with some stories from people who knew Granny D, who walked with Granny D, on her many adventures, both in New Hampshire and across the nation. We have some up here. I have to get away from the microphone 1 second. Up here behind the podium, I invite you all to come up and to take a look at what we have up here. There's a number of things, but this is special that you have not seen at any of our previous rallies. So we have an artist who is here today, Sissy Shattuck, painted this portrait of Granny D some years ago. And this is the portrait that hangs in the Keene State University Library, Keene State College Library, along with Granny D's straw hat and her walking stick, I believe, and some other mementos. These are a photographic poster that was made. These are available this is a fundraiser, and Sissy did this for a fundraiser for our cause. And they're $75 a piece, so they're not, but this is top drawer. This is a really nice rendition. The colors are absolutely stunning on this. So we also have some miniature versions of it as well. So these are some nice greeting cards these are special ones, and we have these available for $15 here at the table. So we hope that you'll come and do that. And I'd like to recognize Sissy. Sissy is in the back. Sissy, raise your hand. Thank you for doing this. This is amazing. Sissy does commissions, not only in the United States, but also in Austria. And she would be glad, we've got her cards up here, and she'd be glad to tell you the story about when she painted that picture. I'm sure she's got some stories about Granny D for doing that. So thank you, Sissy, for bringing that out. I really appreciate all you're doing for the cause. So I'd like to get things started. I'd like to introduce an old friend, an educator of my 3 kids at Conval. Tim Clark was an editor at Yankee Magazine, and then became an English teacher extraordinaire at Conval High School here in Peterborough. And Tim, you don't know this, but you called to tell Ethan, that he had won a statewide writing competition. I still have that on my answering machine. So Tim is also distinguished in that he has been a voice actor for Ken Burns, and you're going to have to fill me in. I don't remember which ones, but it's more than one, right? You've done a couple of them. And so he'll tell you more about that when he comes up. So I'd like to give a nice Peterborough welcome to Tim Clark.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. I want to start by saying bravo to the marchers. Got to keep walking, got to keep marching. I myself am an example of someone who is talking the talk without walking the walk. Don't ever get old, your knees go fast. Okay. It's great to see all of you here. It's great to see so many of my former students here. And I'm honored to be asked to read Granny D's words. I'm also honored to have known Granny D before she was Granny D. I knew her when she was Doris Haddock, because she and I went to the same church in Dublin, and a wonderful woman. I remember hearing this speech at Conval. So some of the dates may be different, but I'll try to do it as well as I can in honor of Doris, one of the great people I've ever known. We meet in disturbing times, but we must not be disturbed. We must be calm and peaceful, for peace cannot come from hearts disturbed and angry. And peace, if it is to come, must come from us, from our hearts. Peace in any family requires fairness, kindness, honesty, shared financial and physical security, with a positive and creative view of the future for each individual and respect for the land that sustains us. When those basic conditions are not present, happiness fails and bad things begin to happen. Bad behavior begins to happen. Just as peace on any planet also requires fairness, kindness, honesty, shared financial and physical security, with a positive and creative view of the future for each individual and respect for the land that sustains us. When those basic conditions are not present, bad things begin to happen. Let me say this one more time in a way that our president might understand. She's speaking of George Bush at this point, George W. Bush. Mr. Bush, if you want peace and safety in America and the world, work to make fairness and kindness and justice and economic security the common condition of the world. If you want terrorism, then drop bombs, support dictators, steal resources, use all your weapons, whether or not you can pronounce their names. The ultimate weakness of violence, Dr. King taught us, is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but if you do not murder hate, in fact, violence merely increases hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that, Dr. King said. For here is our new reality. The world is too small these days for us to do harm over there and hide over here. The world has found us. We have to base our international policy now on fairness, kindness, honesty, shared financial and physical security, with a positive and creative view of the future for each, hold on a second, individual, and respect for the land that sustains us. We don't have a choice. We are constrained now. We have to do the right thing to others in order to survive ourselves. The world is changing rapidly, and the plannable world of your parents is being swept away. Remember, she's speaking to Conval graduates. For you, learning will be a lifelong affair. Your life will be about constant learning and growing through a number of related or unrelated careers. And that is a dramatic improvement in the condition of human beings, if life is about maximizing our potential, which it indeed is. Here in high school is where you learn about the world and how to get along with others. Experience teaches us that there are not very many people who are not worth knowing or having as good friends, if you will take time to see and understand them. Unfamiliarity with other people, ignorance of other people, is what makes wars possible and violence possible. And it drives all the social divisions in a school or in a town or a nation or a world. Pure ignorance of each other. When you understand people well enough, you can't help but love them, even if you hate them too. If you think those are incompatible emotions, I remind you to think about your relationship with almost any close member of your family. Of all the shifting sands your tents will be pitched upon, perhaps the condition of the Earth's ecosystem and its democracies will present you with the greatest changes and challenges. If the great present division persists between the world's poor and rich, I assure you that you will live in a violent world and that the tragedy of September 11th will be remembered as the beginning of such things in your experience. If the great exploitation of the Earth's resources persists at the expense of sustainability, you will experience the flooding of Venice, New York, and other great seacoast cities and treasured beaches. You and your children and your children's children will curse my generation that let it happen without trying harder to end the corruption and the selfish misuse of resources. They will have to learn to adapt and to fight for the very planet's survival. Yours may be the most privileged generation to ever have lived upon Earth. And I don't mean that you have soft advantages, but that you find yourself in a time when your individual contribution will have an heroic importance to the world. This may sound overblown. It may make no sense for you, for an old woman to stand here and tell you that you personally are the hero or heroine whose actions will decide things for a troubled world. But I think that may indeed be the case. Our lives are more beautifully linked than you can imagine. And the genius of one life can affect all the others in unimaginable ways. So I urge you to become the hero or heroine of your own life, in any case. And that is enough for your happiness, regardless of your degree of extension into the world. Now you must find your genius, which is sometimes a hard trick. Sometimes it's easily spotted, embraced, and nurtured. But some of you will not find it until you are old and gray. Some of you will never find it, although it is always there for you to find, I assure you. Be open to your own genius. Fearlessly try everything in life. See what gives you energy instead of taking your energy away. Discover the things that keep you joyfully up until 6 a.m. If you can't get excited about anything in the way of a career, don't despair. Keep exploring. You're on a grail quest, and your quest will be rewarded if you keep combing through life, looking for the thing that sparkles for you It is there, believe me. It is yours to seek out and find. When you are my age, you will understand that the voice you must listen to is that small one within you telling you to save our planet. Do not fail to appreciate the magical moment of life. Fully participate in it, joyfully and constructively, never giving an inch to injustice, unfairness, or inequality, nor ever forgetting the long line of people you have come from, known and loved in the great circle that extends well into the next life. Be involved, stay involved, understand what it means to be an American. It means to take responsibility for mature self-governance. In a world where the polar ice is melting and the atmospheric ozone levels are thinning, and in a world where 1 child in 5 goes to bed hungry, 2 out of 5 if they are African American, we must assume responsibility. We must take our place at the table of power. What a wonderful, challenging time in which we live. A time when so much is at stake and when we all have so much important work to do in taking back our freedom from the corporate world that has been created. I promise you, we the people will someday know again the feeling of having a president that a majority of Americans actually voted for. We will see our highest values and human aspirations, not our lowest needs and greeds, reflected in the policies of our government, locally, nationally, and internationally. We can be happy in this great adventure, upon which so much depends, if we do not let anger and frustration poison our lives. We will get busy and make our plans. Let us go out and build an army of voters and be happy about it. When you were a child, did you not want a chance to save the world? Well, be happy. We've been given that job in the great awakening of this sleeping giant. I hope you have a high opinion of yourself and that you will understand that you are worth the trouble you have invested in yourself so far, and that you are worth even more effort in the future that begins always at this moment.
Thank you, Tim Clark, for reading that, and thank you for Granny D for writing it. Tim, I'm curious, what did you feel when you read that because you hadn't heard it for, 13 years?
Well, I remember being there. I remember being struck, although I'd known her a long time already, by her amazing eloquence, her amazing diction, her precision, her vocabulary, but most of all, her passion. And that, as we know, is the single sine qua non, that without which there is nothing, is passion. And I, again, congratulate all of you on the passion that brought you all the way from Dublin this morning.
Thank you, Tim. Now, I have something I would like to give all the walkers, if you wish. I will find it. Hang on one second. Well, I'll get it to you next time. All right. So we have, as I said, we've got some speeches of Granny D's. We also have some stories from Granny D. Is Chuck Weed? Yeah. Right here. Oh, there's Chuck. Chuck Weed is a representative, state representative from Keene, correct? Used to be. And walked with Granny D, knew Granny D, and he's the first of the stories that we're going to tell about Granny D today. Chuck Weed.
I'll tell you something from inside the New Hampshire legislature. I was elected in 2000. Granny D was still around and coming and talking with us and inspiring us. But in 2010, there was a big turnover in the New Hampshire legislature, and the Republicans took over. But I think it was the second time that I decided I would try to have New Hampshire establish a Granny D Day. And I remember when I got up to talk, I wanted just to point out to my fellow legislators that If they checked Google this morning, they would see that 15 million people had hit upon her website around the world, and that this celebration and this honor was designed not just for us in New Hampshire, who has a real treasure to be proud of, but the whole world. And of course, not everybody felt that strongly about Granny D, and it went down to defeat. But it was an interesting process for me. I figured that a great hero like her would be wonderfully accepted and honored. I certainly did, and I think most of my fellow delegates, the people that I served with in New Hampshire, did as well. But I do have one story, and that was just before Granny D left for California to do her walk. And we'd had an ongoing dialogue for years. I taught political science at Keene State, and we studied the wealth primary long before we heard from the current crop of people about the 10th of 1% of the people who make contributions to politics. And so I was a skeptic about public financing in general. And of course, her focus on that walk was McCain-Feingold, public financing. And so I said, Granny D, I really appreciate you doing this walk. It's going to lead to great publicity, but I still want you to know that I think we're crazy if we think that the system is going to take care of itself with this McCain-Feingold. It's just they'll figure out loopholes, they'll figure out ways to get around it. So I want you to know that even though I appreciate what you're doing for me, I think you need to change your focus away from establishment approaches to public financing to recognizing that public financing is the only way. So I recalled that conversation to her. I think I was taking her over to Concord to speak to the legislature in maybe 2003, 2004. And so I recalled that conversation for her. And she said, oh, yeah, I remember that. And I want you to know that as I was walking into Memphis, Tennessee, I realized you were right. So I think, we're even when we get old, we can learn. And I was really appreciative of that. And I do think she's one of the more articulate and has more important speeches than almost any American I know. And I'm really pleased to have the archive at Keene State College. It's a great treasure. She was a wonderful person. And I hope we can make a difference. And I'm sure these walks are doing it. It was great to see all the support we were getting from the cars that were going by us. And they were seeing us this time. Instead of walking the back roads, we were on the front roads. So thank you for the opportunity and the honor.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Chuck. So I found what I was looking for, and I'm going to pass this around. So you see, this isn't Granny D's hat. I tried to approximate that for a prop today, but I stuck a turkey feather in there. And anybody who would like, any of the walkers who would like a feather for their hat, I have one in this bag. So if you would like a feather, just grab one out, okay? I thought that would be, and maybe for each walk that you go on, you can add another feather. Would that be a good thing? So I'll try and get some more of these. All right. So here are the feathers. So our next speaker is also somebody who knew Granny D. Is Francie here? Oh, there she is. I've known Francie for the last couple of years, working on a campaign in Antrim, and I was not aware that you knew Granny D until the other day, and I'm so glad that you came up, Francie. Francie works with Audubon and a whole bunch of other organizations. So, Francie, I'm glad to have you here.
A lot of us locals went down and walked with Granny D, Doris, different segments. And I have two little anecdotes to give a sense of the impact she had as she went along. And thinking about Granny D, it was never about her. She had emphysema, arthritis. She never complained. she met people and it was about them. It was never, ever, ever about her, which that's quite something. So I was part of New Mexico and into Texas. And one morning, we had Granny D's cell phone. And cell phones were new then. It was like, oh, a cell phone. And so we'd help notify newspapers, TVs ahead, trying to get in garden clubs and schools and she didn't just walk her miles every day. She then would talk to whomever. And so she would meet with groups. And she was always whipping us. What have you lined up? What have you lined up? So there we were coming into El Paso, and a radio TV van pulls up right next to us. The sliding door opens up, and the fellow says, we want you on Good Morning El Paso now. Sure. So she gets in, and another fellow got in with her, Nick Palumbo, who had heard about her. He lived in Chicago, and he'd heard about her, and he got on a bus to New Mexico and somehow found the group, and he joined the group when I was there, and there weren't very many people at that time. And then Nick stayed with her for months. So Nick and Doris get in this van, and there's a bystander there, and he said, do you know what you just did? You just handed her over to the shock jock of El Paso. He was a foul-mouthed, every town has one, I guess. And we thought, oh my God, we didn't take care of Doris. Doris didn't need taking care of. So an hour later, the van comes and delivers Doris back to us. And Nick Palumbo gets out of the van first, and we're, how'd it go? And Nick goes like, she kicked butt. And the story we heard was that this shock jock fellow kept talking about his arthritic knees, and he was fixated on how many pairs of sneakers Doris went through. And she would say, well, that's all very nice, but you probably want to know why I'm doing this. And she would talk about money and democracy and that we have no democracy anymore, and we the people, which she often said. And he kept getting back on, and then he got on to, I always park next to because I can't walk from the parking lot, whatever. And she said, oh, you poor, poor dear. And his backup staff cracked up. You could hear them, evidently. And then they went for a break. And whenever he was whining, which is his mode of operation, they would all chime in, oh, you poor, poor dear. And so we hope that they're still doing that to the guy. The other story, though, is much more typical of the encounters, what she could do. And we were in a rural stretch in New Mexico, and a beat-up truck pulled over past us, pulled over in the street. And I think I can tell this story with, it was very touching. This fellow got out of the truck, and he looked to be as beat up as his truck, and he was not much younger than Doris. And he started walking, and it was the afternoon, he probably had a day in the farming. And Doris stepped out in front of the group and got up to him within a couple yards. She opened up her arms, and they hugged. And she didn't speak Spanish, and he didn't speak English, and that's what Doris could do. And she did that all the way across the country. And this man had heard about her on the radio. It was before the Shock Jock show, so it wasn't that one. But he was really touched by this woman at age 89 who cared so passionately about something, a cause. And I don't know if he knew about campaign finance reform or not, but what he did know about was someone, the word passion, cared, and so she impacted people throughout, and she still is.
Thank you, Francie. Doug Williams. I know we've kept him a little late here. There he is. Doug is a local psychologist here in the Peterborough area, very active in the community, and he's also got some great stories.
Actually, I don't have any stories. What I have is a vivid memory of Granny D. I have only a few minutes to talk about Granny D, whom I knew somewhat in her later years. We talked together a few times, and I followed her work and its outgrowth, and I still do. To be brief, let me give you a picture to think about. Consider the remarkable similarity of mission between Granny D and Moses. Yes, that Moses. Read again and again the story of Moses in the book of Exodus in the Bible. In the same way as Moses, Granny D was in touch with and served the same spirit of renewed life, seeking to bring true freedom to people who were oppressed. The Hebrews in Egypt were an oppressed people, essentially living in slavery under the Pharaoh. Americans, without generally recognizing it, are oppressed people under the control of corporate Pharaoh and its governing minions. We can't even gain the freedom to know whether or not GMOs are in the food we eat or feed to our families. Corporate Pharaoh now has a bill in Congress called by some the Dark Act, designed to forbid us ever attaining that freedom of choice and ending whatever progress we have already made. Granny D, like Moses, was a servant of a higher power. To free ourselves, we need more than petitions and long walks. We need the help of a higher power, the true spirit that can inspire, galvanize, support, and gift us with the same freedom that we don't even know we don't have. We have been blinded, we have been deaf, and we are fed a diet of lies. That being so, we have lost our vision of real freedom, and the Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. We as a nation are perishing. Granny Doris was a person of immense vision and great spirit. Like Moses, and because of what might be called a late start, Granny Doris didn't make it to the promised land, but the land that she envisioned for all of us. But that's where we need to go, out of captivity and into the land of promise, not of compromise. Go down, Granny, way down in U.S. land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thank you.
Powerful, Chuck. Thank you. We have another story from Carol Wyndham. Carol has been instrumental in setting this up along with Regina. Where's Regina? Behind me? Where's Regina? There she is. We had a great task force of volunteers. Jen and Jen's husband were over there serving pizza earlier. Thank you for all the people who set this up. Took a lot of hands to get this together. So Carol, would you come up and would you tell your story?
Okay. We've had some pretty serious thoughts here today. And I thought I'd share with you something to lighten the whole picture. I have a couple of stories that Granny shared with me. One of them you probably some of you are familiar with. It was in this film that's advertised here, Run Granny Run. And I thought you'd enjoy hearing two little anecdotes. She was on the way to debate Judd Gregg, who was running for U.S. Senate with her as opponents. She was going to debate, and this was in the film. She and her husband Jim were in a car going there, and she suddenly said, "Oh my gosh, we got to go back." And he said, "What, Mom?" And he said, "What are you talking about? Why?" And she said, "I forgot my teeth." Okay. This other story, Granny herself told me, and I haven't seen it written or recorded anywhere else. And just please take it in the spirit of fun that she shared it with me. She was in Minneapolis on the trip that she took, the 23,000-mile trip, after her big walk, going around getting people to register to vote. And she realized that Michael Moore was giving a speech that night. So she said, "Oh, let's go." She had been on stage with Michael Moore a number of times, and he was very solicitous, so he knew her well. But she was a little late, and so they sat in the back row, and Michael said at the end of his speech, "If you have a question, just stand up and tell me your name and where you're from." So she stood up and she said, "I'm Granny D from Dublin, New Hampshire." And he said, "Oh my God, are you still alive?" Anyway, thank you, and thank you for coming today. Let's keep the spirit of fun and determination going and always enjoy it. Thanks.
Carol, thanks for that, and also for all that you do for the cause. Carol's husband, John Wyndham, has a song, and then we're going to have a Tattoo play a song that was written for Granny D. After they play, we're going to have Dan Weeks say a few words, and then we're going to dismiss you for today. Again, thank you again for being here. John Wyndham, would you come on up?
Actually, I wasn't expecting. I played the song this morning when the walkers took off, but I have a poem which I brought just in case there was an opportunity to recite it. I'll just start off with a brief recollection of Granny D. Carol and I went over there to be with her when her son and daughter-in-law went off for a while. We slept the night, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, she came in and said, "Okay, your bacon and eggs is ready." And she was 99, so I got up and we had bacon and eggs, and she cooked them. But that's one of my favorite recollections of Granny D. I knew Granny D pretty well. She would come to our house and play Scrabble, and we drove her around a lot, so I got to talk with her. And I think some of what she had to offer rubbed off on me. A year after she passed on, I wrote this poem. And this is a tough poem. This is a kind of tough love poem. I grew up in Australia, and when I was 8 years old, it was World War II, when I maybe was 7 or 8, and it was the first time I heard the Star Spangled Banner. And it made a big impression on me. the American soldiers were in Sydney on R&R, and hearing that Star-Spangled Banner somehow resonated with me. And so this poem starts off with reference to that, and also has a reference to the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is another wonderful song that I love and that we sang when we went to South Africa. Anyway, just hold on for this. This is called Wake Up America, written in 2011. I heard of you as a child in a far-off land, the stirrings of freedom in your star-spangled banner, whence came that burst of light and daring to set a new nation on a world stage. Your founding fathers, now remote but honored for their high ideals, all men created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, set a boundless horizon for the rugged pioneer. True, you delivered the dream of many, untold wealth through individual endeavor, while still a nation of laws, though these bent at will by force of circumstance and human nature. America, America, 'tis of thee we sang in the morning of our hopes and longing, the shrine of liberty, defender of the poor and downtrodden, bulwark for human rights, the exceptional one. God bless America. Thus spake the megaphones of media, the not-so-free press, pursuing its dreams through corporate power, not government of, by, and for the people, but corporations are people too, they say. Land of light and shadow, we are told to look only in the light, for in the shadow lurks the lynch mob, the red man, black man, and woman struggling to be free in the land of the free. Onward through financial collapse, depression, and battle, the bankers take control, a global empire spreading its tentacles westward and into all lands by economic debt, assassination, intrigue, and war. The secret team is born, implementer of presidential fate. The luminaries of your land terminated before their dreams are realized, but still the dreams go on. God save America. And now your bloated military I see, waging war at will through shabby and transparent attacks on weaker nations, as well as on your own people by false event, demolition, and dust. Your propaganda intones its ceaseless sewage. Torture becomes you. Corruption consumes you. The resource prize is fixed in your greedy eyes. You are become amoral and cruel. Your lies abound. Your once brave citizens, ignorant and exploited, cringe from knowledge of your crimes. Sweet fool's paradise, in thee I abide, lest truth break my apathetic stupor in its stride. America, America, where have you gone? Were you but a fable, a hope forlorn? Rouse you, awake, face the fact. The American criminal enterprise is here and now intact. God help America. The people are a mighty force which once aroused cannot be stopped. For like a valiant army they speak the truth in common ways. Their truth is marching on. Lift up your eyes, your heart and mind. Discern their truths of every kind. While some yet sleep, still others wake. Their voices raise a mighty quake, whose tremors signal the coming change, the change that sets us free. Free from fear that cripples men. Free from fear of those who say they'll keep us safe, but only take our rights away. Though die is cast, we can't turn back, or ramparts of our minds unmask the foe who hides behind the lie. In God, truth is our trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Tattoo. This has been a fabulous afternoon. Thank you so much. We're running a little late, and there's another group that needs to use this space. So I'm going to quickly call on the Executive Director of Open Democracy in the New Hampshire Rebellion, Dan Weeks, who will be speaking, incidentally, tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the Monadnock Lyceum. For those of you who are waiting for the walkers, waiting for the bus is over at the Unitarian Church. It's waiting for us. When Dan's done, it'll be waiting for you when you get over.
Thank you, Brian. This is going to be really short. I just have the lucky job of saying a bunch of thanks here. I have the privilege of leading the team that organizes these events, this crazy New Hampshire Rebellion of ours, and in Granny D's footsteps. So would you join me once more in thanking Fred and Leslie and Tattoo Band, in thanking Jen and Jay-Chi and their son for serving that wonderful pizza and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Speaking of which, thank you, Ben & Jerry's, for supporting us. Peter, our amazing sound guy who brought all this equipment down at no charge. We're so grateful. I get to lead an amazing team. You guys have met Beth, who was the head honcho in organizing today's walk, with Brian, our new deputy director. Zanny is here, led the walk. Thank you, Zanny. We have a bunch of our amazing summer fellows who are here too, James and Emma and Taisuke and Kimberly, joined by others who are working with us all summer as they get ready for another year of college. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our speakers who shared powerful recollections and poems inspired by Granny D. Thanks to our board members, Carol and Regina, and the others who were part of this planning committee who donated a lot of hours, our former board member Jane as well. Folks, when Granny D arrived in Washington after 3,200 miles, 90 years old, 4 pairs of sneakers, arthritis and emphysema, arrived in Washington, she started her day not on Capitol steps, but in Arlington National Cemetery. Because there were buried thousands of Americans who had given their lives for these great ideals. And whether we agreed with those wars or not, they had sacrificed for these ideals. And Granny D was finishing a remarkable sacrifice for these ideals. And when she made it, joined by congressmen and senators who had driven out the last mile to walk with her to the Capitol steps, when she made it to the Capitol steps, she addressed those brave spirits of Arlington National Cemetery, and she asked this question: did you, brave spirits, give your lives for a country where we could stand together as free and equal citizens? Or did you give your lives so that laws could be sold to the highest bidder, turning this temple of our fair republic into a bawdy house where anything and everything is done for a price? We know the answer to that question, and we are going to continue to answer that question and to walk in her footsteps, as we've done today, 6 miles and counting, by doing what I think she would ask all of us to do right now. Over these next 6 months, the nation is focused and the world is focused on New Hampshire as the presidential candidates come here week after week asking for our votes. We have a question for them as they ask for our votes. We want to know what all of them, Republicans and Democrats, will do to end this system of corruption that is compromising our great democracy, our free republic. We ask you to walk the talk with us as we continue these walks around the state, to ask the question of the candidates. We'll let you know when they're coming. Just join the list, to sign the pledge that's been circulating, and to talk to your friends, your community, because we must build this movement. Time is not on our side. We've got huge challenges as a nation, from our warming planet, unsustainably so, from a national debt and from wars that are needless, a healthcare system that does not yet serve all our people. There are huge challenges. This issue must be addressed first, this corruption of money in politics. So let's keep on walking. Let's keep on celebrating. Let's keep on making the sacrifice that Granny D did. Thanks so much for being here. Grab the shuttle, grab a little more ice cream, a little more pizza, and have a great day. Thank you.
You can look up on YouTube and see Ben doing all kinds of similar, very helpful, powerful demonstrations. Not only using BBs, using Oreo cookies, using all kinds of things. It's very helpful and very helpful for all of us to get our heads around the enormity of the mispriorities in our country. I'm very pleased to be able to once again introduce one of the boldest leaders in our country. When we were thinking about who we wanted to speak at our membership assembly, back in September, we were thinking, who could really inspire us at this moment? We're in some pretty tough times. You look at the news every day. They're doing terrible things, to people at the border, doing terrible things for people around the world. There's, so much suffering. You look at the local news. We're losing loved ones and friends to the opiate crisis. We need some inspiration, and we're also coming up against an incredibly powerful establishment. And so when we invited Tulsi Gabbard to come speak to us, it was because she has shown throughout her career a willingness to stand up and do what's right against powerful interests, even when it's tough. I'll never forget seeing the news when during the Standing Rock fight, when people from all around the country were standing with the Sioux who were putting their lives on the line, and seeing that the veterans were coming to stand with them in solidarity, and that Tulsi Gabbard as a major in the Hawaiian National Guard was with them in that situation. That speaks volumes. I mean, we have, as Ben was saying, there is right now a revolving door between Congress, these defense contractors, these huge corporations, and people in Congress. The amount of political power that those fossil fuel companies have and exercise. Having a congresswoman is willing to go and stand with protesters standing up, it's just amazing. And the other thing, in terms of bold things that have impacted our whole country, you think about going back to February 29th, 2016, day after the South Carolina primary. Senator Sanders had just lost by almost over 40 points, landslide loss. And then the headlines that day talked about that, but they also talked about this brave congresswoman who came out and had endorsed him, resigning as vice chair of the DNC. Huge. That's the kind of bold leadership and people we need championing the movements we're building. And so we're very excited that Tulsi was able to join us for this special event. Thank you so much.
Doesn't matter where you are in the country or how cold it is outside, aloha always brings that warmth from within your heart out into those around you. So thank you all so much for coming out and joining us tonight for this very important conversation. Thank you, James and Heather and your team from Rights and Democracy for organizing this. And I know Wayne took off, but let's say thanks to Wayne for hosting us here and wish him and his wife well. The title of this forum tonight, Investing in Peace and Prosperity. Why is this so important to us? You just heard from Ben a number of reasons why this is so important. Yes, it's important to those of us who are veterans, those of us who have served and worn the uniform and deployed and seen some of our friends killed, paying that ultimate sacrifice. It's important to us who have had the blessing to be able to come home to our loved ones, to still be alive today, but to see far too many of our friends suffering with wounds that are both visible and invisible, dealing with this burden of the cost of war every single day of their lives. And they don't do it alone. They do it with their family members, with their loved ones, their spouses, their children, their parents. And far too many of them still, after surviving not one, not two, but 3, 4, and sometimes even more deployments into combat, come home only to lose that battle and end up taking their own lives. When we talk about peace, this is what we're talking about for us. It's very personal. With less than 1% of the population in this country serving in uniform today, there are fewer people in this country who are experiencing this direct cost of war than I think any generation before in history. If you go back to Vietnam and to World War II, it has a different impact. And one of the results is, as you go through these election cycles, as Ben was talking about, how often are people raising the question, challenging people who are seeking to serve in some of the highest offices in the land on their position? Where do they stand on this question of war and peace? Do they have foresight to understand what the cost and consequences of war are? Do they understand what it means to be charged with that heavy responsibility of deciding when and where our men and women in this country will be sent into harm's way? And for what will they be fighting for? What objective will they be seeking to accomplish? And whose interest does that objective serve? How often do you hear these questions being asked of those running for federal office in this country? Where is our peace movement? There are many people who will call themselves progressives, who will be among those beating war drums the most, thinking that somehow when there are bad things happening to people in other parts of the world, that the answer is to go and drop more bombs, to launch more regime change wars, when the reality is that those decisions end up costing more for the people in those countries, who they may honestly be trying to help but not thinking through the consequences, or who know and understand from history that every time we go and launch these interventionist regime change wars, we are not only making the lives of the people in these countries worse off and destroying their countries, not just for that generation, but for generations to come, we are also undermining our own national security and taking those taxpayer dollars to spend on these wars that go on for far too long, taking those dollars away from our communities and our people who need them right here at home. How often are these conversations happening? Not nearly enough. So this is why I appreciate so much the opportunity to come here and join all of you tonight, and the fact that Rights and Democracy has made this a priority as we head into this next election and the next election and the next election beyond that, to make sure that every one of us recognizes that it is our responsibility. It's our choice. It's the power that we have within our hands to decide what kinds of leaders we want in this country. Do we want leaders who are bought and paid for by defense contractors, who have no problem writing bigger checks to them without thinking through what is in the best interest of this country? What are our needs for the American people, and how are we addressing them? There was a report that just came out a few days ago, put out by the National Defense Strategy Commission. And in this report, they are recommending that we increase our defense spending to somewhere between 4 to 5% of our country's GDP, which brings us to around $800 billion a year. More than is being currently spent, and their plan takes us down a road to where we would end up spending over $1 trillion a year by 2024. It wouldn't surprise you that this commission is made up of 12 people who are all appointed by both the House and Senate Armed Services Committee leadership, and that those leaders have great ties, obvious ties, through money, through hundreds of thousands of dollars of money to the defense industry. As we see in so many areas in our federal government, whether you're talking about healthcare and healthcare policy, whether you're talking about agriculture policy, whether you're talking about housing policy, as you look down the line, financial policy with Wall Street banks, you can go down the line, and it is glaringly obvious as you follow the money trail to see the direct link between the policies that are being made and who benefits from those policies. And those who benefit from those policies are those who are writing those big PAC checks to the members of Congress who are writing those pieces of legislation. So where does that leave us? We are the ones who have the power to make that change, to make it so that when those bills are being written, to when those policies are being debated, that they are debating about how best to serve the interests of our neighbors, our families, our communities, our states, and the people of this country. Not debating which company will benefit or lose based on the provisions that are in that policy. You know, one of the things that was outlined in this report basically said that we have to continue to increase spending on defense in order to achieve decisive victories against Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and terrorism. Congress has not declared war on any of these countries. And yet this Defense Commission, authorized by Congress, is laying out the plan to achieve decisive victories over these countries. Where is the conversation about peace? Where is that conversation about how we can determine what the problems are, what the challenges are in our relationships with different countries around the world, and figure out how we can build that path towards peace through talks, through examining what the situation is and what actions we can take that best serve the interests of our country and best serve the interests of peace. Instead, what we hear are a lot of politicians who are ratcheting up rhetoric to go to war with a country like Russia or China, not recognizing the fact of what the consequences are when we are ratcheting up a new Cold War with Russia, the other nuclear power in the world, where we are just a trigger away from launching a nuclear weapon on both sides. We have to be careful and aware about who is influencing our elections in this country. Every one of us does. Whether that's a country like Russia or China or North Korea, or if there are other countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others who are paying hundreds of billions of dollars in Washington to try to influence our policymakers, to try to influence the policies of this country. We have to be aware of this, but to say, as some politicians are, that Russia has declared war on America because of what happened in 2016 is dangerous, to say the least. And the rhetoric that continues to be ratcheted up since. This is how they justify continuing to, or how they justify wanting to spend over $1 trillion on revamping our entire nuclear weapons system. We have to be clear-eyed about what is happening around us and hold leaders accountable. We have to recognize those who don't have the foresight that is necessary to see through what the consequences of these policies are and how they impact us here at home. In the money that's being spent and how that impacts everyone in our communities. I talked about the veterans, our veterans who pay the price for this war these wars in a very direct way. But we have to remember that every single one of us, whether you serve in uniform or not, every single one of us pays this price. Ben outlined some very clear numbers of what that price is. So as we seek to address the challenges and the needs that we have in our communities here at home, and we get told by people, well, how are you going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from? Where's the pay for, as they say in Washington? But they refuse to talk about the cost of these wars. They refuse to talk about the defense contractors who are advocating for more of this and more of that. They refuse to talk about the fact that the Department of Defense has not been audited, the waste and the fraud and the abuse that still exists there. They refuse to talk about the priorities of this country, the needs of our people. We can go down the list of healthcare, of housing, clean water, clean air, investing in our infrastructure and education. The needs are so great. And we have the resources to be able to take care of every person in this country. It's a question of whether or not our leaders will have the courage and the foresight to make those decisions that best serve our interests. It's as simple as that. And that change that must happen will only occur if we, the people, make it happen. We all know that what I'm talking about is not something that's limited to this administration. This is something that has gone on consistently through both Democrat and Republican administrations for a very long time. This foreign policy that is counterproductive to our own interests. And that's what needs to change. I want to close just by talking about what's happening in Yemen, because this is part of this problem that we're talking about. How are our taxpayer dollars being used? How is that serving our interests or the interests of peace? To have the United States allied with Saudi Arabia, waging a genocidal war, where Saudi Arabia is dropping US-made bombs on tens of thousands of innocent civilians, children in Yemen. Where over 85,000 Yemeni children have died of starvation because of the blockades that Saudi Arabia has imposed. Where you have 22 million people in Yemen who are in desperate need of humanitarian aid. We have been pressing and fighting and calling for the administration to put an end for US support for this genocidal war in Yemen. Yet they have refused every time. Not only have they refused, but every time we have tried to bring a bill to the floor in the House of Representatives, it's been shut down, where we are not even able to have a vote. Now, the administration did something that they claimed was in response to these calls. They said, okay, we understand. We are not going to refuel Saudi planes, bomber planes anymore. But everything else is still happening. The United States is still standing with Saudi Arabia, still supporting them. And under the leadership of a president who, in spite of Saudi Arabia's murdering of a journalist in their embassy in Turkey, in spite of Saudi Arabia's continued exportation of this extremist Wahhabi ideology that's fueling terrorist groups around the world, in spite of Saudi Arabia's direct and indirect support of these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in places like Syria and Yemen, in spite of this war that Saudi Arabia continues to wage in creating the worst humanitarian crisis in a generation, President Trump says, well, we've got a $110 billion weapons deal with them, and we can't put that at risk. Because look at all the American jobs that'll create. We have business people with a conscience in this country and business people without a conscience. And right now in the White House, we have a businessman without a conscience running this country. And if the best he has to offer the American people to strengthen our economy, to create good paying jobs, is to make bombs that'll be sold to a country like Saudi Arabia to be dropped on innocent people, then we need new leaders in this country, because that is not who we are. We will continue this fight in Congress. Senator Sanders and Senator Lee took one step forward with the procedural vote that took place in the Senate last week to end U.S. support for this war in Yemen. We hope that they will actually pass the bill next week. We've reintroduced our legislation in the House, but time is not on our side, and time is not on the side of the Yemeni people. Never ever forget how much power you have in your hands. I think this is the biggest mistake that too many people make. Thinking that those with the power in Washington are out of control, and yes, they are. But there is a check and balance in this country that lies within the hands of every single American. And so the choice is ours about what kind of change we want to see. And will we do what it takes to make that monumental change, to completely shift the power base away from Washington, away from big money, away from the defense contractors, away from those whose entire lives have been built on this foundation of institutional power that has nothing to do with serving the interests of the people of this country. We have it within our ability to take that power from them and bring it back to the people, to those that we care about, for those we care about, for the country that we care about, for the future that we hope will be so much brighter for our kids and their kids and generations to come. Thank you very much for listening.